It is super common for your students to have a difficult time pressing themselves from the belly down position, either back into a tabletop or child's pose or a downward facing dog, wherever the destination is. And one of the reasons is because they're utilizing so much spine strength. So I'm using my husband to demonstrate today just to help give an understanding of how you can assist your students with some different cues and different approaches so that they start to build the strength that is required to do that press up or press back or press into, like I said, a downward facing dog. So generally what happens when your students press from the belly, we're just going to go into a child's pose, so you can bring your hands under the shoulders, is they use the back strength. Probably not super mindfully or intentionally. They might be trying to lift the whole body up as one unit, but what ends up happening is the chest will lift first, and they're coming into a back bend momentarily, and then they're pressing back. Cool. You can come forward. So this might not be problematic. You can have a student who does this for years and years and years, and it's totally fine. However, you can have a student who does this and starts to complain a little bit of some lower back pain, because if you can just lift up again and pause at that point, usually when they press, and he's probably doing maybe a more mindful job than most would be, there is this kind of thing. And coupled with maybe the hips are trying to lift at the same time as the hands press down more, and then that increases this sagging and this hinge point into this area even further. You can relax. So again, might not be a problem, but for some of your students, it definitely can be in that area. Now, maybe that's not the case, but perhaps they want to really build upper body strength. Perhaps they're saying to you, I feel like I'm weak in my upper body. I feel like I'm not able to really support myself. I have a hard time doing yoga asana that involves a lot of upper body strength. So because this press back movement is so frequently done in a sequence and in a sun salutation, like how many times is it done, right? A lot. It actually is worth it to get your students to be more conscious about the way that they press back. Now we can say things like, try to lift, the unit of the spine up at the same time. But if they don't have the strength developed to do that yet, then you're still going to get the same thing happening, which is, just do it again. The chest lifts up first, there's a sagging there, and then the hips will press back. So if you have a student whose intention, you can come forward, whose intention is to build that upper body strength, this is what I have found to be the most transformational. I have done this within my body, and I have done this with many other students who have felt that for years they practiced without seeing any changes, and once they started to implement this thing, they started to see changes. So what I get them to do is exactly like you just did, is start with the chin tucking in towards the chest. Now, similar to how you do a sit-up, there has to be some sort of bounding and anchoring energy. And that's going to be obviously pressing through the hands. And in this case, I'm going to get him to keep the knees down. But then to start to lift away from that in order to keep the strength coming from more of the upper body and not always utilizing those back body muscles, we're going to then lift the ribs and the belly. See how he's coming into spinal flexion there? Now further to that, he can tuck the chin to the chest even more, and there's even more spinal flexion. And then he's going to lift the ribs a little bit more. Pause there. So he can hold there. Most people won't be able to. You can lower down and relax. So it's about rounding into the upper back, not for the purpose of making a shape, but for the purpose of creating an effect. The effect is, I have to use my upper body strength, because once they come into spinal flexion, which is chin tucked, belly lifted, spinal flexion, they can't use their spine strength to lift them up. They have to use the upper body strength through the arms and through the chest. You can relax. So this is what I have used to help my students build up the strength gradually for this type of transition. Now, what happens when they cannot do it to a certain point? Because 100% you will see your students do the following. You say chin tuck to your chest, pause. I always like to say, pull the ribs and as much of the belly button off the ground as you can without lifting the pelvis, the pubic bone. Keep that anchored down. Then I say, take micro movements. Pull the chin to the chest a little bit more, pause. Pull the ribs off the ground a little bit more, pause. This is usually where people are at their max point. So I always say, do the most that you can with this. Attempt to press back. Now I want you to press back, but really struggle with it, and then maybe do a little bit of collapsing. Yes, so he's really trying. He's doing too good of a job, and then he's pressing back into child's pose. Okay, so most people are not going to be able to do that. They're going to collapse a little bit, come forward again, and you'll probably see something more like this. So chin will tuck, ribs will lift, they'll get all these good bits going, they'll press, and then they won't be able to do any more, and then they'll go into that back bend again to get out of it. Yes, you'll see that, and then they'll press back. Okay, cool, thanks, come forward. He's going to be so tired after this. So that's generally what happens, and that is okay. As long as the intention is, I'm going to try for as long as I possibly can to utilize my upper body strength and not default to using my back strength. It's okay, and it's probably likely that there's going to be a point where they have to use some back strength to do the transition. Now, the other option is that if they want to stay in spinal flexion and stay in utilizing the upper body strength the whole time, get them to come onto their forearms first. That's it. And he has his fists on the ground. It could be hands, palms flat, any type of position. Elbows can be here. Elbows can be even further forward. It just really depends on the person. So just for you, bring your elbows a bit more forward. Good. Then he takes the same action. Chin tucks into the chest, pull ribs, spinal flexion. So he can feel can you feel it? He said, As he's pressing down through the elbow points and he's tucking the chin in, again, he can't use the back strength to do the job. He has to use upper body strength, front core body strength as well. Then he's slowly going to press into a child's pose from there. And you can see he was able to stay, and he can walk the hands in to transition. Yeah, you can rest there for a little bit. That he was able to stay in that spinal flexion for a lot longer during the transition because the elbows were down on the ground. You can come forward one more time, and then we'll give you a break. So this is my recommendation. Again, I have done this with myself when I felt like I had very little upper body strength to work with, and it was like I could repeat this movement over and over and over again, but it wasn't until I started to actually emphasize spinal flexion as a means of relocating the source of strength, right? When we don't use spinal flexion, a lot of times the source of strength is coming from the spine to press the body, the primary source of strength. And then we've got the arms to just support that. In this instance, we're trying to just minimize the source of strength coming from the spine and then primarily make the source of strength be coming from the upper portion of the body, the arms, the hands, the shoulders, and the chest, and the core as well. So he's going to go one more time. This is how I like to cue it if I'm teaching in a class. So we're going to work on a press back. Start by tucking your chin into your chest. Resist the urge to go fast. This is really important that you take this in snapshots. No matter how challenging it feels, really resist the urge to default to going into a backward bend. Start by pulling the ribs off of the ground and notice how this feels in your body. Make sure you're breathing softly. You're not holding your breath. Your face is nice and relaxed. See if you can add those elements a little bit more. Press hands, tuck chin, lift ribs, pause and breathe. Press hands, tuck chin, lift ribs, pause and breathe. Now he's going high because he can straight away, and then he can press back. But again, most of your students, they're going to get to a point much lower than he was at where they're stuck and they're feeling like it's really challenging. And all you got to do is remind them that do the movement in this specific way for as long as you can in the transition, and when you feel like you can no longer maintain it, then you can move into some of that spinal extension to get yourself through. Now, I do sometimes assist with a tiny bit of light touch, and this is how I can do that sometimes. So I will say, tuck chin to chest, pull belly off the floor, lift ribs, and pause. And for him, it's quite a lot. But for some people, you can barely feel underneath. You can barely see, whether it's working or appropriate for you to touch them or not, that's irrelevant. It's just for you to observe as a teacher, yeah? So for some people, it's going to be like they're a lot lower down to the ground. So I will say, keep this shape. Keep spaciousness in your lower back. Keep spaciousness in your upper back. And then, keeping that spaciousness, try to press back. I'm barely touching him, and obviously for him, thank you, you can rest there. He's probably so exhausted. Obviously for him, it's within his capacity to be able to do that, but that was not actually always how he did this. Is that true?
No.
No, yeah. He didn't always do it that way. Even someone who's as strong as he is, he would often just do the backward bend. And when he started doing it this way, it wasn't that strong. It took him a while for it to get familiar in his body to then build up that those pathways between the mind and the body to be able to press back and keep that connection. Now, for future instances, the spinal flexion doesn't always have to be so exaggerated and so pronounced. What you can do, though, is just let your students know that initially in the beginning, as you're going kind of taking that opposite approach. Before you were doing spinal extension to press back, now you're doing spinal flexion. In the beginning, you want to exaggerate that movement a little bit more. Once you feel like you've got that strength and it's developed a little bit more in the body, then you don't have to emphasize and exaggerate so much spinal flexion, and you can have the spine be a little bit more neutral in the body. So this is my tip that I know has been helpful for him, has been, maybe not right now, has been helpful for me and helpful for so many of my students who have really struggled, because not only does it help that movement, but it helps lowering down, and it helps so many other poses that your students are going to be needing that upper body strength for, and it helps them to feel more confident and be more successful and just break down this very common typical movement that a lot of people actually do struggle with. So give it a try in your classes and let me know if you have any questions about it.